Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and we have something exciting ahead of us today. We're going to talk about your own personal Jesus, which is to say that we're going to cover everything that you need to know about By God Alone's edition of personal faith. That means we're going to learn about Tenet revisions, personal tenets, spiritual fulfillment, and indeed the study-faith interaction. This is some really cool stuff, and I am excited for it, although I have some questions that hopefully will be answered tomorrow when we will be covering, well, the external stuff. So we're talking about how do rites work, how do archbishops work, and so on. I am generally quite positive for what is to come right here. I will also tell you that there's obviously a lot of content, not just for this game, but also for all the other games that I cover here on the channel that I am yet to cover. Trust me, I will, but things are currently busy. And speaking of busy, at the end of this week, I will be in Stockholm, and I will be talking to the CK3's devs right there. While I don't know quite yet what exactly will be going on in that meetup and what I can tell you afterwards, I can tell you right now that, hey, if you want me to ask certain things to the developers, make sure to tell me in the comments. I will read them and then I might ask them like I did here, only to be told to never talk to them again. Folks, let's just jump straight in, let's figure out what exactly is going on here. Like I said, it's going to be all about Tenet, spiritual fulfillment, personal tenets, and the new study faith scheme. Let's talk about the vision first. Your faith is something you practice, not something you have. In Live CK3, religion is essentially a label with a handful of modifiers and restrictions hanging off it. You inherit your religious doctrines and core tenets at birth, and unless you convert or found a new faith outright, your spiritual life is a static block of stats that never changes. What we want to replace that with is something that behaves a lot more like the real thing, a daily practice with personal convictions, moral tension, and plenty of room to drift over the course of a lifetime. Imagine a newly minted archbishop who adopts scholasticism and starts nudging the tenets of his rite year by year until the theology of an entire region has quietly drifted towards something his grandfather would not have recognized. Mind you here, of course, it's not necessarily heretical, his grandfather wouldn't necessarily hate it, but it would be different because faith is a lived creature. Or a lustful, greedy duke who nevertheless drags himself through decades of fasting and self-denial because he knows, on some level, that his predilections are going to earn him nothing but eternal anguish in the end. Or a count who quietly practices a forbidden teaching and lives in daily terror of his local archbishop. These are the kinds of stories we want the religious system to naturally produce. This is something I think that is super important. Crusader Kings 3 has always had a really in-depth faith system, but that faith system is now 5 years old. We are talking about 2020. Even culture, at this point, now has a more active system, which is to say that if you choose, for example, a new tradition for your culture, as much as that is still top-down, because it is just one guy saying, this is now a tradition, it is something that you do because you collectively engaged in doing the thing that this tradition expresses. It's stronger in some traditions and weaker in others, but the point being that ultimately culture currently is more involved in your regular play than faith. In faith, whatever you are, whoever you are, if you decide to change a tenet, if you make your way to reforming your religion, to doing something differently or converting, that happens from 0 to 100. The in-between steps is you as a player making the decision that you will go there. That is also true actually for example, a heresy springing up, right? Heresies don't spring up because there was, in this region a real problem where, for example, simony was practiced, or they were against celibacy, or whatever a heresy might do. They just spring up because a number says a heresy needs to spring up, picks a region, and then there you go. This is deeply, deeply disconnected. Still, so much better than CK2 or really any other game in this regard, but not quite where CK3 can be 5 years after launch. What they're doing here is connecting this all together. This internal, this spiritual thing is the connecting piece that makes it so that your decision to become a heretic, to choose a new religion, to go a different way, it is something that is deeply connected to your character. Up to now, you needed to essentially suspend your disbelief. You needed to make a meta decision of, I will be converting over there, this is what my character will believe tomorrow. Here, your character is making this decision for themselves. This is an excellent and really necessary step, but most importantly, I think it will also make something more systemic, and again, I can't believe that I'm using that word for CK3, but it will turn something more systemic, which previously just spawned in, be that heresies, be that issues with the faith, be that excommunications, and so on. Really, really cool approach. And lastly, of course, it should also be noted that it now finally gets it right. Faith is a lived thing. In these time periods, we have to assume at any given moment that people truly believed. And, well, that means that the Catholicism practiced by one person in one rite is going to be different from the Catholicism that somebody else practices in the same rite, or God forbid, in a different one. Them putting that stuff in here, really cool. Let's move on and talk about Tenet revision. To make any of this work, we have to start with tenets, the building blocks of every faith's identity. We're doing a comprehensive pass on them with over 24 new ones coming with By God Alone, targeting primarily the various Christian traditions. We're talking about things like Peace of God, Apostolic Succession, Transubstantiation, Hesychasm, Scholasticism, Simony, and Mortification of the Flesh. This is great art. They got really good at the art. Listen, I will always only tell you that the art team is a 10 out of 10 in both Victoria 3 and CK3. They deserve infinite money and everybody else should be fired. Every Tenet now has two distinct effects. A faith-wide effect applied to followers of the faith, actually right, but more on that next time. When the Tenet is being actively promoted, this is the old behavior, mostly preserved, and a personal effect applied only to characters who adopt the Tenet as a personal conviction. As a concrete example, picking Peace of God as a personal tenet lowers your night limit. You're not supposed to be keeping a huge martial retinue if you're really serious about this. But it gives you cheaper ally calls and sturdier alliances, the politics of the reluctant warrior. Adopting transubstantiation unlocks extra social benefits from feasts. Dulia lets you select a patron saint of your own. Ora et Labora gives you the gardener trait. Each personal tenet is a small vow with an impact both on how you play and your spiritual fulfillment. I like that they give you modifiers that just are there. It just makes it so that whatever tenet you pick up personally will make your gameplay and your playthrough different. But honestly, looking at this now, if I adopt Peace of God as a personal tenet, I feel like it should be a penalty and reward system almost, maybe like mini quests, where, hey, if you have fewer knights, if you have more alliances, that means you're more aligned with Peace of God, and that then gives you benefits on spiritual fulfillment, for example, right? And maybe if the rite has adopted it for a global benefit, it makes it so that just in general, your rite looks at you more favorable. Basically, I would like it, I guess, if next to the static modifiers that just say, hey, you've committed to this, now you gotta deal with it, we had something where we can go even further, where we can say we're really committed to this. It's like a mini quest, that, like a mini ambition maybe, that I want to go after so that I'm truly in alignment with this tenet and not just on the very baseline. It doesn't sound like that is in the game. I also think that it might make it just too difficult for the AI to interact with this on such a large scale. But basically, yeah, to really make it lived, I would love to see this. In general, I think it is fine to just have a modifier as is. Tenets also now have a status within a faith: core, permitted, prohibited, or just known. If a tenet is not known, the faith is genuinely unaware that a tenet exists, and therefore can neither teach it nor forbid it. This status also exists on characters, so you can know something and even adopt it as a personal tenet, even if your faith doesn't. Tenets become known to the faith via characters and their actions. For example, by an archbishop founding a new divergent rite and actively preaching a tenet, or someone bringing up a foreign practice they learned about in an ecumenical council. Once a tenet is known, they can be promoted to permitted, prohibited, or core through ecumenical councils or by the head of faith declaring them such, in Catholicism via a papal bull. I really, really like this. So that means when you are a Catholic lord and you make your way to Asia, you can adopt tenets that have nothing to do with Catholicism, but have everything to do with your lived experience. Because, I don't know, maybe you rule over a Taoism county, or maybe it is all about Buddhism or Hinduism in your life. These are lived things that your church cannot relate to, but that you can. I am a little bit, I'm kind of questioning how exactly does this work. Obviously, they're going to explain this hopefully going forward, right? In the upcoming dev diary here when it comes to divergent rites and such. It feels to me, if I adopt a tenet that would be literally the worst, the most satanic thing if the church knew about it, but they don't know about it, I feel like there should be a chance where it can just flip to becoming prohibited relatively easily, right? Because ultimately, it seems like a little bit of a loophole there where I can do it just because they don't know it and might never find out about it unless a big event happens, like the Ecumenical Council or a divergent rite comes out. If I just live with it and nobody knows about it, but it's like, hey, I eat other people, but in a way that isn't just the cannibal tenet, right? Would that not be something that they would then still kind of hold against me if it came out, instead of them just going, oh, I don't know about this? I'm curious how exactly this works. I assume that they have an answer for this, but currently we don't have an answer here in the dev diary. So yeah, that was just on my mind right there. Adopting permitted and core tenets as your character's core conviction is safe. Adopting one known to you but not to your faith is trickier, since it could be declared anathema at any time if the church finds out. I'm so curious about this. I know what they're saying here, right? But to declare something anathema would mean that the Pope would have to deal with it, or the Ecumenical Council. Surely he's not going to deal with it if I'm like a count in the middle of nowhere somewhere, right? Curious stuff. I'm really curious about this, just how easy or hard it is to get something declared illegal, good, positive, negative, and so on. But like I said, honestly, I think they've accounted for this. It's really just my curiosity speaking. Prohibited tenets must be practiced in secret, and anyone who catches you at it walks away with a very juicy blackmail hook. Makes sense. Then right here we got purgatory, and we have fervent, Proselytism. Lesser requirements for the Catholic path ascension decision. More adventurers will take this decision, so become missionaries. Legitimacy gained from converting characters. Makes pilgrim a virtue. Zealot vassal opinion plus 10. This faith doesn't know about this tenet. If personal tenet, legend spread chance plus 20% and spiritual fulfillment gained from converting characters goes up as well. So this is, oh, you know what, actually, this is like a mini quest. Yeah, okay, so I basically have mini quests to keep upping my spiritual fulfillment by converting characters. We have, by the way, not really heard about mass conversion, like conversion of other, for example, the tribes in Poland in 867, in Bohemia, the Polabians, the Lusatians, the Sorbs, and so on and so forth. I'm really curious how exactly that is going to work, whether it is in this update. It kind of ought to be, right? But I haven't heard about it as is. Anyway, cool. So we see this tenet right here. You can adopt this, and it has a global and a personal benefit. Where the new tenets are limited to Christians, we are also going over old tenets to ensure they all have personal effects and are appropriately balanced. Awesome. Finally, this DLC yet again steps into this kind of pathway that CK3 had at the very start of its journey, where an update means that everybody in the world will get something out of it. For example, culture, legends, diseases, legitimacy, all of those impact everyone everywhere and will enrich your gameplay there as well. They're finally doing it as well. Really happy to see it. Adopting personal tenets is not limited to Christians after all, and neither is spiritual fulfillment. So we already know now that you can choose what you see your faith as, what matters in your life, what do you want to pursue. Obviously, different people have different ideas. Faith is a lived thing. What you have in your head is not exactly the same as what the Pope in Rome thinks is what Catholicism actually is. Now, the way all of this comes together is through your spiritual fulfillment. It is a new character metric running from -100 to +100 that tracks how closely the life you actually live matches the life your faith asks you to lead, and how this impacts your spiritual well-being. It is entirely internal. Other characters cannot intrinsically intuit how you're faring on your spiritual journey, unless you tell them, of course. Here we have, for example, a confession. Patriarch Werner waits patiently in the empty chapel. Even if the weight over my shoulders is not heavy, it can still be lightened. Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. He is our patriarch and vassal. We can already see here the new symbol for theocracies. I like it. That's a bishop's mitre. That's really cool. Your court chaplain may ask something of you, or you may hear something during the confession. It doesn't seem like he has something big to confess here. He isn't evil yet at the start of the game. Henry IV is only fighting the Saxons. He is not yet massively opposing the church. I mean, it's kind of getting there, right? But yeah, this is the start of the Gregorian reforms really taking place. Here I want to take a second to correct something I wrote last time. We talked about this in my video as well. They wrote, think of it as the spiritual counterpart to stress, except instead of measuring how close you are to a mental breakdown, it measures how close you are to either sainthood or damnation. That is not entirely accurate, so to be extra precise, it measures how close you feel you are to being blessed in the Lord versus being slated for eternal damnation. Or, in another belief system, your karmic balance, or how in tune you are to the Great Spirit. Naturally, this inner spiritual turmoil rubs off on how you behave towards people around you as well to some degree, but it is not something others judge you for. Any penance necessary is all yours to administer upon yourself. This, in turn, has an effect on stress, as well as other conditions described below. You can be the most evil person with no piety whatsoever and still think that you're really connected to God, that you're really connected to your religion. Because one describes how people see you, and the other describes how you feel about yourself in the context of your faith, right? So this is essentially stress. There are people out there that are really evil and they are super stressed, but then there are also people that are really good and are super stressed. Stress describes how you as a character react and relate to events and decisions that you take in the world outside. But the judgment occurs entirely inside of you. So this adds something new here, but it isn't just like a new currency, it is something that is as deeply tied to your character's self-understanding as stress itself. This is in contrast to piety, which measures how much the rest of your faith respects you as a figure of religious standing. You could very well choose an event option that yields piety for your external display while dropping your spiritual fulfillment because it doesn't correspond with what your faith, or more precisely, your chosen rite, believes to be right living. More commonly, an option that adds stress because it conflicts with your traits, but also adds spiritual fulfillment because it's the virtuous thing to do. Makes perfect sense, right? For Christian characters, fulfillment steps through 7 named tiers, each with its own unlocks. At the very bottom is Doomed, -95 and below, where stress gain is cranked up substantially, but the gloves are also off. Murder schemes do not generate stress, hostile schemes against clergy are similarly worry-free, and you can fabricate hooks on your own court chaplain. The worst place to be spiritually, but in some ways the most liberating place politically. Above that sits Forsaken, -65, which still gives you free reign to plot against your clergy, but eases off at the stress gain multiplier. Troubled, -30, retains only the chaplain hook permission. You are still sinning, but it's not quite as bad. Penitent 0 is the neutral midpoint, with nothing unlocked and nothing penalized. You're at peace with yourself, if not with God. Absolved starts charging you extra fulfillment for hostile schemes against clergy and lets you run Befriend on your chaplain. Settled boosts your stress drain, extends Befriend to your head of rite, and opens up the new act of devotion decision. And finally, at Ingrace, you get the full kit. Further improved stress reduction, and access to the Mentor in Spiritual Fulfillment decision, which lets you guide other characters through their own spiritual journeys. What we are hoping this produces is exactly the kind of dilemma we've been talking about. A generous, pious ruler who climbs to Ingrace feels great and has tools other characters don't, but has also made it costlier to scheme against the church. A doomed or forsaken ruler has more levers to pull and stronger nerves for pulling them, but suffer more for going against their nature. Low fulfillment isn't a failure state, it's just a different playstyle, and depending on your character's personality, it might even be the more coherent one. Non-Christian faiths use a simple 3-tier fallback that swings stress gain one way or the other, but doesn't unlock bespoke content. Now in the screenshot, what can we see? We can see Ingrace right here as a tooltip spiritual fulfillment, right? We get stress loss plus 50%, which is fantastic. Can take the stage and act of devotion decision, provide spiritual guidance, and indeed befriend your court chaplain and your head of rite. This is entirely, just to highlight this, a limit that your character places upon themselves. If they are really fulfilled, they don't want to act against the church. They see the church as something good, as something that interacts directly through their lives, and the faith clearly is good, it is real, and it is connected to them as a character. They don't really want to go for that direction. This entire system is fantastic, because we're looking at something that finally connects your character to the institution that is the church, and of course also makes it so that they themselves can completely disagree with how the world sees them. You can be the most blasphemous fool, excommunicated and everything, and theoretically still be aligned, relatively well at the very least, with your faith. Because your faith is something that belongs to you, that belongs to your character, and not to the outside perception of you or the faith. I really like this. And we get then, of course, to the natural conclusion where we say, okay, and that will mean that in general, a character might say, I need to nudge the church into a specific direction because that is how I see the world. It is no longer an entirely cynical thing that you do as a player because you decided that it would be fun if you had cannibalism as a tenet. It is something that actually drives your character because your character believes it to be right. And, well, if your character believes everything to be lost, their soul will be thrown out into oblivion anyway. They might as well do relatively evil things, because they don't value the church, they don't value the institution the way that they would if they did feel fulfilled. This approach is really cool. Now, I am happy to see that we are also getting this, of course, for non-Christians. It does very much sound like the entire puppet system and everything related to influencing the clergy isn't going to be a part of, any other religion, which I understand, that is fair enough, because this is a very particular thing that happened in Catholicism. Although I will say, of course, that if you live in other regions, there are many circumstances where lords still are very much reliant on working with the clergy, on interacting with them. We have certain faiths as well where the secular leader is split from the actual religious leader. For example, if we talk about the caliphate, traditionally, of course, that is one and the same temporal and religiously in nature. However, once then you get the Seljuks and they are the sword and shield of the Caliph, it is suddenly split, right? This would still be neat as kind of like an outlier there that goes into it, but from a purely Christian point of view, think about it this way. You are a ruler, you need to interact with this church, and you interact with the church through the actual rules of the game as determined by the church. If you want to change the rules, you have to do it proactively within the system through your archbishop, through your court chaplain, and so on and so forth. Eventually, I hope we can even drift certain rites to unify, to, rise and fall. They did already say that that is a thing, but I wish it was a conscious thing, or I hope that it is going to be a conscious thing, because, again, when I look at the Carolingians, for example, they were incredibly hellbent on making sure that their rites were aligned. They shaped Christianity like no other dynasty for this very same purpose, and they primarily, of course, did it because A, it assisted them, but B, it also made it so that, yeah, we are looking at them actually gaining spiritual fulfillment. They believe that this is how they achieve success for their soul and for all of the souls of their subjects. This right here, really cool stuff. Now, even deeper, of course, let's talk about a personal faith right here. How does fulfillment actually move? 3 ways. Your personal faith, the specific set of tenets you've chosen to champion, certain religious actions like going on pilgrimages and taking confessions, and the choices you make in events. So each personal adoption pushes your fulfillment up or down depending on how well it aligns with your personality traits, and tenets that reward a virtue you actually have are weighted twice as heavily. A generous character adopting philanthropia gets a big positive swing. So you get the swings here not from acting on a personal tenet, but from adopting a personal tenet. You accept the rules of that tenet and that gives you a swing, right? So you're going for the rules and then indeed you get that swing. A lustful character adopting mortification of the flesh is choosing the virtuous path in spite of their sinful nature, and the system is sympathetic to that. The stress is real, but so is the fulfillment. Event options that match the virtues or sins of a relevant tenet of your rite come with their own small fulfillment swings, up or down, depending on whether you lived up to the vow in the moment. In addition to all the new interactions with the church, this is what permits you to actually practice your faith throughout your character's lifetime. So, we choose something and that gives us swings. Maybe you get a negative swing if you pick something entirely for the stats, but the stats are just that good. Makes perfect sense, right? And then continuing from there, you mostly have events. I assume that like excommunications do this as well. Like if I get excommunicated, yeah, that changes how the world sees me. But surely me messing with the church and the church messing back with me to that degree also changes how I see my own spiritual fulfillment, right? That would be what makes sense to me, but it's not mentioned here. It's only these 3 things right there. Nonetheless, definitely a good approach. You accept a certain set of rules and get fulfillment from them, and then of course you choose certain events which actually corresponds directly to how you live your faith. I am kind of missing here, although it also kind of goes into stress, I guess. If I adopt peace of God, and then I still declare wars non-stop, surely that doesn't lead to spiritual fulfillment, right? Surely that doesn't lead there. Like I said, I would have liked to see some mini ambitions here, like don't go to war for X years. It's boring, I know, but that would make it so that you would actually relate directly to what your personal tenet is, just based on your actual actions. It's not mentioned here. It's kind of confusing, but okay. The cost of revoking one of these vows you've made depends on what you're overriding. Dropping a permitted tenet for another one comes with a cost, because your church is fine with both and you're just making a legitimate choice. Dropping a core or prohibited tenet costs stress instead, because you're going against the grain of either the institution or your own conscience. Your personal convictions also have a quiet way of leaking out into the world. A tenet you practice openly, what isn't prohibited in your faith, becomes available to close family automatically, and may also spread to members of your court and other relations you have. If they like what they see, they may even adopt it themselves. AI characters are also more likely to start new rites. Again with these rites, next time I promise, incorporating convictions they hold dear. The personal and the institutional are never fully walled off from each other, which is the whole point. I love it. This is really good. Like I said, I think my main feedback here is that I just have a couple of questions with how it actually feels lived. Like, how does your tenet relate to other mechanical actions like executing people, intervening in wars, doing unjust wars, for example, right? That kind of thing. I'm not seeing too much here with your actions that are mechanical in nature and not just event-based options that you choose, right? And how they impact things. We're gonna see how it goes. I don't know. I feel like an ambition system would really slot in nicely here, but it doesn't seem to be mentioned. Now let's move on to something that I really like, that I massively like, and that is why I also hope that we're seeing something more for mass conversions, for conversion efforts, for missionary efforts right here in this particular DLC, or at least in the update as well. Let's talk about the Study Faith scheme. The other big way to change your personal faith is, of course, to learn someone else's. Study Faith is a new learning-based scheme targeted at another character whose faith isn't yours. Each phase takes some amount of time, with success chance driven by your learning skill, piety, and the usual roster of traits and perks you'd expect: theologian, erudite, mystic, scholar, open-minded, plus the intellect trio. While the scheme is running, a stream of events colors the experience. For example, a young heir picks up the material unreasonably fast, a court tutor spots what you're up to and offers to help, a priest of your own faith challenges you to a public disputation. You can duel him instead if you'd rather not argue. A rival sabotages your notes. Is this like learning a language notes? Because I don't like that event. That's fine though. The target turns out to be a closet non-believer, or worse, a practitioner of some ancient rite hiding in plain sight. Each of these nudges your progress one way or the other. More importantly, gives the study phase its own narrative texture. On completion of a phase, so there's several phases, Study Faith does one of 3 things, depending on how you finish and what's available. You might learn tenets, such that those practiced by the target's rite becomes known to you personally. You might also learn doctrines, typically a prerequisite for the more structural changes you might want to make later on in the church, right? Or you might choose to convert spontaneously, an option offered at the end of a successful study. There is no upfront piety cost to convert. Instead, how smooth the transition feels depends on how much of the target's faith you've already absorbed, so how much you actually understand of them. The more of its core and permitted tenets you know, and the more of its doctrines you already practice, the gentler the landing in terms of piety and levels of devotion lost in the process. It's easier to convert to a faith that's similar enough to your previous one after all. Study Faith replaces the previous conversion path. You can still be subject to demands to convert by a liege, demand others convert, or convert in response to being holy ward, But if they choose to do so, they will go through the new system and suffer consequences for it, depending on how well they can pick up the new teachings. You may even counteroffer with a demand to learn more about it first. When we look at the missionary work, at the wars of mission that were waged in the east of Germany, we're talking about the Wends there basically, when we're talking about the Poles, when we're talking about the Prussians, or the Bohemians, or the Hungarians, they didn't get a missionary and then go, yeah, I'm Catholic now. They needed to understand Catholicism, which is why, as a consequence, the Catholicism they practiced was in effect different from the Catholicism practiced from wherever their missionaries came from. Was it influenced by it? 100%. But they understood it differently. I absolutely love this. This means it is not a one and done. Oh yeah, I converted you, you're just like me, we fit in perfectly. That is not how it happened. In all corners of Europe during this time period, people believed in different, mostly pagan folk kind of things that they didn't believe in 2 villages over. Because those beliefs were remnants of what they think fits into Catholicism, although anybody that is 2 villages over or on a different, in a different realm wouldn't agree with at all. It is phenomenal that we're doing this now, and I really hope that if I do missionaries, in whichever way this directly works together with the system, hoping that it is in the system, I should say, I really hope that we're looking at something where the missionary work is not easy, that it actually leads to divergent rites. This should lead to things where, for example, if I convert the Bohemians and they pick up a slightly different form of Catholicism, my archdiocese might no longer fit their actual beliefs, they found their own rites, and all of a sudden I got a neighbor who isn't paying my archbishop and most importantly has divergent ideas of what Catholicism is, which is dangerous for them and makes them a target of mine. I really like this and I hope that they integrate it this way because this scheme is awesome. Being able to learn about a faith and only then can you convert is also something that should make it so that dead religions can actually be revived in an interesting fashion because you're reviving whatever your character thinks that religion was rather than reviving the actual thing. Awesome, awesome stuff. I'm so looking forward to this. Let's take a look at Study the Faith of Emir Yahya here. When the world was divided into mine and yours, the divine laughed, for to its eyes there was only ours. The Duke studying fables of a foreign faith. Have you no shame, my sister Countess Hawies exclaims. If your foes learn that you fraternize with heretical ideas, they will do all in their power to paint you a heretic. Perhaps my choice of Sunni writings could be misconstrued by cretins and enemies in the court. No, these are venerable Sunni theological treatises, or you're right, such texts are not fit for a duke, or let people think what they will. These writings are enlightening. So this is one of the events. You can see right here the success chance, and then we got a couple modifiers. Classic stuff right there. I really, really like it. If you are a Christian, and you go to India, and you adopt a whole bunch of the tenets, but also the doctrines of Hinduism, you can come back and put that stuff in action. Your Catholicism will then be something that you explored in play. It is not just you as a player going, yeah, I guess this tenet looks nice. It's something that your character relates to, and what I really hope, for example, that we can also learn of tenets that the other faith doesn't actually have, but we misconstrued it so much that now we think the faith has it, and we can put it into action in our faith, making something completely new in the first place there as well. Really cool scheme. I love this. Again, like I said, I have a big question here because I haven't seen anything about conversions and missionary work mentioned other than that adventurers will do it, I guess, right? More often, I should say. I really hope that we're seeing something here. This is so awesome. I was reading in particular about the Ottonian dynasty and their conversion efforts in Bohemia and in Poland in particular with Saint Adalbert or Wojciech. I think Wojciech is how he is known in the Slavic countries. I really, really like the history there with how involved the Ottonians were and how they favored this particular approach, and of course it then led to Poland, for example, getting its own archdiocese and essentially having its own rite and direction for its faith. Really cool stuff. I can't gush enough about this because I think that is the right approach to understanding faith and to having your character make the decisions of how they see the world rather than always you as a player. Now here, we're just going to go through this relatively easy on. This is a cool part by Ellie. Ellie is a UX designer on CK3, and this is all about what the personal faith window is going to look like. So we got all these levels right here, then we got the personal tenets where you can adopt and you see your virtues and your sins, because you might adopt something that goes against your sin, but that actually makes you really fulfilled because it shows how good of a person you are, right? Then here you see the tenets and the doctrines, and of course what you are aware of. You're part of the Roman Rite, part of the Catholic faith, and so on and so forth. Classic stuff, really cool. And this right here then shows you what fulfillment you would get from adopting any of these. The doctrines they haven't said too much about yet because again they correspond to the rites. You can change doctrines. How exactly we don't know yet. I assume you can hold rite councils, not just full-on ecumenical councils, but also just councils within your rite maybe, that kind of stuff. Cool stuff. I'm looking forward to this. Yeah, no, great interface. This is what it currently looks like. This stinks. it has to look better, okay? This I really like the drawing right there. Good luck, you're gonna nail it. Alright, now since we speedran that section, let's talk about the next one, which is called Last Rites. Last Rites is a decision you can take to put your soul in order while on death's door. This was a high-stakes affair in our period, and many a monarch worked hard to die well. This decision and its ensuing event chain will allow you to confess your sins, be anointed by a priest, take the Eucharist, and then provide the opportunity to donate funds or these lands to a holy order or the church. This will aid in you being remembered well, standing your heir in good stead. Mechanically, this translates to your heir getting delicious modifiers, based on the institution you supported, for the early years of their reign. The event chain will also reflect the likely cause of your imminent death, your believed proximity to salvation or damnation, based on your level of spiritual fulfillment, and who sees fit to be at your bedside to send you across the threshold. Are you surrounded by loved ones and ministering angels, or has your life of sin conjured up visions of demons, there to claim your soul for a bath in hellfire? So this right here is a good old Barbarossa, isn't he? To err is human, but without confession there can be no absolution, says Patriarch Bertram. I'm indeed human, and sin has found me despite my best intentions. How often have I been led astray by my lustful nature? I have harbored in a port of darkness, my being a sodomite. Perhaps worst of all, I am a I don't think this is slander. My suffocating guilt chokes every breath. I must lay bare my sins with proper contrition, or be denied the Eucharist. Forgive me, Father, or some sins should go to the grave with me. I have to assume, if I tell him, it lets me die well, and obviously it might be in character, basically. But if people learn, it depends, I assume, on how the Patriarch sees me, right? If they learn that I was a sodomite and cannibal, my heir isn't going to do all too hot. This stuff was super important. Leasing stuff to the church, handing stuff over, I should say, in game terms, it's of course leasing, but not in real life, was incredibly important. People did it all the time because it meant something to them, and they were hoping that it would indeed rescue their soul. We're also looking at this kind of stuff being something where you can go from, for example, partition to primogeniture. Not in those terms, of course, historically, but you would say, hey, you need to support my son. I love my son. Please put my son on the throne. And then your vassals, if they are at your bedside and they indeed believe that you were a good king or a good emperor, then they would adhere to this, even if, technically speaking, somebody else might have a claim to the throne, or at least to a part of it as well. This is the kind of stuff that really matters. I like that we have it in there. They also answered underneath that all Catholics basically have to do this, which, yeah, that is exactly what they had to do. Now, this even more puts me into a mindset where I'm like, I think we are going to be looking at maybe laws coming next year. I would love laws coming next year. I really like this feature. I think it's neat. I would love to see how many events there are, because obviously if it's like relatively narrow, it wouldn't be that great. I would also love if we got something more than just an event. Like at this point, honestly, when we're looking at Victoria 3, when we're looking at EU5, what I'm talking about here is, hey, do you want to lease X whatever out to the church? Do you want to erect a new bishopric in a certain county? Which is something they did. That is something that happened as you were dying, okay? I would love to get a choice. I would love to see a map. I would love to get a better interface than just an event, right? Surely we have the technology these days. I like this. I just hope that the technical implementation goes a bit further than events. I am not the biggest fan of just events. But okay, what is up next? Rites proper. We're going to talk about this here on the channel. Let's talk about how we're feeling about all this stuff. I really, really like this personalized approach. They are finally bridging the gap between your faith as a character and the wider faith. They impact one another now, and that is directly on purpose. Meaning you can be terrible and happy, you can be great and unhappy. All of these things correlate directly to you as a character. No more do I as a player need to will these things into existence. Oh yeah, my character totally feels bad about this despite his stress level being 0. Finally, it is properly connected. I no longer just have to headcanon this, it is actually happening in the game. That is a big step. I like the implementation so far, although with the personal fulfillment, it is a personal kind of limitation, a personal vow that you take, so limits coming with it make perfect sense, but I would also really like it if then increase and decrease wasn't just driven by events, but instead was driven by minor ambitions. Don't go to war for X years, hold 15,000 feasts, or maybe, I don't know, tell somebody about how pious you are, even if you are not pious, because that is something that your Tenet, for example, suggests. I would love that more mechanically oriented implementation, but fundamentally what we're getting here is something that finally puts the faith into the characters of Crusader Kings 3. I am a big fan of what they're doing here. I need to find out, and we're going to find out tomorrow, of course, what exactly is going on when you want to change a Tenet, how rites work, and how you directly relate to this, because those are the open questions that are yet here for me, ultimately. Super excited for this stuff. This makes it so that your journey is something you can bring home and then impact your rite with as you change their tenets, because you are the one that knows about them and now pushes them, of course, via your puppet bishop. Listen, I only wish that this DLC had come 3 years earlier. How about that? Okay, Folks, I'm gonna leave you right here, and I will see you tomorrow. For now, I'll see you later, alligator.